Welcome to the Make Do Suburban Fireman podcast, where we're keeping it real, talking all things suburban fire service with your hosts, Nick Peppert and Sean Duffy. This podcast is done in partnership with the Rust Belt Jakes and Build Your Culture. So grab a drink, pull up a chair, and let's go. All right, and we're back. Make Do Suburban Fireman podcast, episode 51. We're going to be talking rural fireground considerations with our special guest, Bill Adkins. Bill, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me. Appreciate it, Nick.
Yeah, honored to have you here, man. So, we typically start the show off, basically give you the floor, take a few minutes and let us know a little bit about yourself. For those that are listening, give us a little background, a little bio, if you will, on kind of where you started in the fire service and kind of your journey to where you're at now.
All right. Yeah, my fire service career more or less started back when I was a young kid. My grandfather was a fire chief of the Fayetteville Fire Department, which is where I'm assistant chief now. Started when I actually became a member at 14, which is the youngest you're allowed to start at this department. Started off as an explorer, cadet, basically. And once I got out of high school, I went to the military. And I joined the Navy. I was a firefighter in the Navy as well. Once I got out of the military, I came right back to Fayetteville. Was volunteering for the 4 or 5 years, and then realized that why not do this for a living? I was working in a steel factory, so got out of the steel factory, started going to classes, and got my paramedic and firefighter 2, and so on and so forth, and started working for Lovell and Sims, and that's a suburban fire department, and so I work with them, and I still volunteer / part-time here at Fayetteville.
Yeah. So how many years you got in now? I memean, you've been at it for a while.
This is 30 years.
30 years.
94 is when I started. Yeah.
Congrats, man. That's a big milestone. So, yeah. And that's beautiful because I feel like your experience in the rural and suburban setting fits the show to the T. Like, this is the Make Do Suburban Fireman podcast. Like, we make it an emphasis to really drill home some of the principles for limited staffing. And people always think, the rural setting obviously is typically limited staffing, right? That is the, kind of bread and butter for most rural operations is doing more with less. But let's be honest, even in suburban settings, we have a lot of challenges with resources and staffing, and we're not showing up with 4 or 5 dudes on a rig. Most of the time, most of us have 3, sometimes 2 minimum staffing in some suburban departments. Maybe we have a truck company, but it's a quint. That's just, that's kind of the world that we operate in, right? And I tell people all the time where I work now, I work for a city fire department, but we're a city in name, yes, and we have some city problems, but we have suburban resources, and that's the world that most people find themselves in, even if they're in a paid suburban fire department, is they're trying to figure out how to make the engine truck culture work in a suburban setting, having to do with resources. Maybe they don't have specialized heavy rescues or truck companies. Maybe they're cross-staffed. And a lot of us run paramedics, on the engines or on ambulances and things like that. And so, where I'm at, we have our paramedics, our firefighters, and they count towards staffing. But whether they're available when a fire comes in is, it's a crapshoot on what you're going to get, because the nearest ambulance could be on another call, which is pretty common. And so, making do with what you have sometimes can be challenging, right? And so that's kind of what I want to springboard in here is with your background in the title of the episode is Rural Fireground Considerations, but I think a lot of this ties into the suburban setting too. So we'll touch on both. But I want to talk about tactical considerations in those settings, particularly in your experiences with them. So there's a lot of information flowing right now from the UL, FSRI. There's a lot of groups out there that are doing really good work with getting information out there. And certainly that is important to us in the rural and the suburban setting, right? It's important to be able to process that. But I think sometimes people forget, like there's this plan A of the utopia of what it would look like if we showed up on a fire. And then there's the reality of what we actually operate in. In a perfect world, engine 1 shows up and pulls an attack line, and that is their job. And the truck company rolls in right behind them, and they're forcing the door and searching and ventilating and doing all this stuff. I mean, and we have, the rescue company is, setting up, and we got a RIT team in place immediately, and we got a backup line, and like all these things are happening in the first 3 or 4 minutes. That's a perfect world.
Yep. That doesn't happen mostly.
I was gonna say that's not happening where I'm working in most of the time, and I'm pretty sure that's probably not the case in most of your experience where you're at. It's just not the case. And so I want to pick your brain a little bit, man. I want to dive in a little bit here on some of your thoughts on what does this information do to you as a captain, as a chief in your departments that you're operating in when you have this information. For example, firefighter rescue survey, search and rescue information that's coming out, ton of great data, right? Mm-hmm. How does that impact your thought process when you show up on a fire? Does it look a little different than maybe say the textbook way of getting things done when you're pulling up and you're having a potential rescue, or you look at it's a residential structure, it's 2 a.m, cars in the driveway, and you're out in the middle of rural America or suburban setting when your next engine's 3 or 4 minutes behind you? How does that change your thought process? How do you incorporate the data and the information that we are getting nowadays? It's really valuable into your decision-making process, knowing that maybe your backup's a little bit behind you. You don't have somebody right behind you. Maybe it's just your crew initially, or, you're showing up with 2 guys on a rig or 3 guys on a rig. What does that look like for you in your area of the world?
Yeah, even with in our rural setting here at Fayetteville, our policy still is we don't pull out until we have three firefighters in the rig. Now, there are extreme instances where you get reported entrapment. You only have 2 people show up, and there's nobody else coming. You need to make that decision. So then we may going out. Yes, we're going to do as much as we can with those 2 or 3 people. And something we got to remember is instead of our rigs, the next rig coming in 2 or 3 minutes later, it might be 10 minutes later. So what can you do with 10 minutes? And the big problem out here in the rural setting is the water. Yeah, we can throw some water on it, our tank water, but we don't have a hydrant right there in the front yard either. So our decisions have to be based on what do we have coming that we know we have coming, and who that may be. In the rural setting, you don't get firefighters that they go through training every day. I may have to look at the seat next to me, and I'll see this firefighter that this is their first fire, and even if they may have been on the department for 5 years, and this is still their first, second, or third fire, and they don't get a lot of training. So because they have their jobs during the day as well. So it all depends on when you show up and what you got.
Yeah, that's the real rubber meets the road rural reality for a lot of the fire service, right? You don't know who's getting on your rig.
Right.
And so, if you pull up on scene as assistant chief and it's you and say 2 or 3 other guys, from what you're saying, I mean, experience of that crew absolutely plays into what your capabilities are. Especially, I mean, I don't know if you guys run into the scenario where, maybe you have guys that aren't certified that can help out on the outside, but, maybe you show up with a crew that's not completely interior certified. I know a lot of guys that, growing up in the fire service in Northwest Florida, there's a lot of volunteer departments that would roll out, and they have 4 guys on a rig, but only one of them's interior certified or 2 of them are interior certified. So, that was something that was a big challenge in early in my career that I had to realize is like, okay, that engine is rolling up here, but only one of those guys can go inside. What does that do to your game plan now? How do you make that work? So, I mean, is that something you guys have experienced where you're at? Are you guys pretty good about, is everybody fire one at least? What is the criteria to get on the rig in Fayetteville, for example, to go to a fire? I mean, are there members that show up that are just outside only? Do you guys have people that are chauffeurs only? I mean, how does that work in your structure?
Yeah, everybody on our rigs will be certified with the exception of a cadet, and we don't count that as a number. So when I mentioned 3 people before the truck leaves the bay, that if it's a cadet, they don't count. So, and they have a totally separate looking set of gear that's not NFPA compliant. They have some PPE to kind of keep them warm in the winter and not so hot and during the summer. But they look completely different. They will stay outside, and they can assist us with changing bottles out and, you know, bringing us water when we need it. But usually when we don't have anyone that's of age that shows up on the rig that's not certified. They need to be a level 1. Now, there are departments that's neighboring to us that do operate that way, and we have to be aware of that when they show up in our jurisdiction, or when we go into their jurisdiction. We got to know who is certified and who's not, and they are, you know, luckily for us, the departments that are neighboring to us, they are very strict that those firefighters that are supposed to stay outside, they do stay outside. They're not doing something they shouldn't be.
Yeah, no, I like that. I mean, you know, I think, like, you know, you brought up the mutual aid partners, and that's the other part of the equation that everybody thinks, well, my organization does this. That's great. But unless you're in an organization that's able to run fires all on their own, which most of your rural and suburban departments are not,
Right.
Most of us are running automatic aid and mutual aid agreements, and that absolutely does impact your operation, especially you know, if you don't really work with them a lot. If you don't really, the only time you see these folks is on the Fireground, certainly that can present challenges to the operations, and whether it's radio channels and frequencies being compatible.
Right.
Department I worked for in Florida, we had a neighboring county that we ran mutual aid with, actually automatic aid with, and our radios weren't compatible. So our battalion chief would have to go stand in the yard next to the incident commander and relay information on our channels to us, and that was extremely challenging because we couldn't hear what the rest of the Fireground was doing. We could only hear our own guy talking to us, and that was tough, you know. And so there's that part of it. There's, you know, equipment. Do your adapters? Do you have adapters for, you know, maybe you got 5-inch hose, they got 4-inch hose. Maybe, you know, they got different threads than you. That's something we have ran into, is where we have different threads for different departments.
Right.
Because not everybody's national standard threads. That's, you know, that's something that a lot of people don't realize. If you're in a department that's fortunate to have, you know, standardization in your area where everybody's on the same threads and same size hose, man, more power to you. But that's just not real world for a lot of places. And then you factor in the fact, you know, that you only see these guys a couple times a year. How is that teamwork going to be? Do they have the same type of SOGs, all those type of things? And so I want to talk about, just for a minute, some of the operational challenges. You know, obviously in the volunteer setting, folks are coming in, you know, after hours, after they work their primary jobs. So, you know, maybe they're not available during the day, or they're only available on certain days or nights or weekends or whatever the case may be. So you do have kind of a rotating group of people sometimes coming and going. But, you know, I want to talk about the challenge on the training side of things. Like when you start looking at training your own people, and how much more difficult does that become when you try to train with, say, other organizations, especially if in the rural setting where maybe they're volunteer as well. Do you run into challenges with that? Do you run into things that you kind of had to figure out over the years on what kind of works to keep people moving in the right direction? And do you tend to have to temper your expectations a little bit with those partners? I think I know the answer to this, but I mean, it's always fun to hear people's perspective in different parts of the world, you know, and you're in Ohio, obviously, you know, an area that's pretty rich with a lot of firefighting history. A lot of departments have been around a long time. Do you run into a lot of, this is the way we've always done it? Do you run into a lot of operational, like, hey, you do you, we do our thing, and we're going to operate on our frequency, we're going to operate our SOPs? I mean, is that something you are dealing with continually, or I mean, what is it like between, like, say, your volunteer organization and your career organization? Are there similarities there, or is it night and day difference?
A lot of it's like night and day there.
Is it?
My first big challenge is, for one, getting my department, you know, the Fayetteville, to actually have members show up to training itself. So that's my first challenge. I do the training. I'm the training officer here, and it's very difficult to get participation. So that's my first challenge. And then I have a challenge to where I will open up training to the mutual aid partners and try to do a training there. Well, then I get 4 or 5 from my department, and I may get 1 or 2 from other departments, and then I never see them again. You know, even when we had that fire, they're at work, and now I got a whole new group of people showing up. I have no idea who they are and what their capabilities are. What's their mindset? Are they going to freeze up when they get inside the structure or not, I don't know. And that is a challenge for us. As far as the whole frequency thing, we border 3 different counties in Fayetteville. We're like a panhandle. And we years ago, we used to have the challenge of having 3 different radio frequencies on a Fireground because none of them had the same. Luckily for the area, over the last 10 years, we've went to the MARC system. So it's on the state radio system. On all 3 counties have the same system now. So that's been a huge, huge benefit for us.
Yeah. Well, you look at any NIOSH line of duty death report. What's one of the big factors? Always communication.
Yep. Sure is.
And so it is amazing to me that in 2024 that we're still fighting a lot of these same battles. Things have improved, I think, overall. I think you're seeing a lot more counties and systems kind of starting to get on the same page. But man, it's slow going. It is slow going. And it's funny because where I work in the city of Oshkosh, we do have mutual aid agreements with some of the townships around us. But when we go to a fire, say in the town, they don't really call us a lot, first of all, which is, and we don't call them a lot. It's kind of weird. It's a weird setup for us. But if we do call them, it's, there's a whole thing. We're going to, say the county south of us. We have to have the dispatch patch us through to their channels. And there's a whole procedure going to and there's the state channels if it's a big operation, things like that. And you would think it would be a little bit more unified in 2024, but man, it just seems like there's still such a battle just on the communication side of things. And then you mentioned, of course, the guys that come to the training, the multi-agency training, are not the guys that show up on the fire because they're, inevitably that's the way it works, right? And so how do you bridge the gap for maybe some of the members that are showing up that you didn't get to train with? If you don't see these guys but once or twice a year, that can be pretty challenging, I'm sure. As a chief showing up, like how much, how do you got stuff to do, right? You got a job to do. You got to put water on the fire. Obviously, we got to get fire suppression going, search, especially in the residential setting, ventilation. All these things have to get done, but the timeline looks a little different sometimes in the rural setting, in the suburban setting, right, than our urban counterparts, right? And so, and especially, if you don't really know these guys that well, do you find it challenging to kind of like, give them a long leash? Whereas if it's somebody someone you've trained with, them, their capabilities, how does that impact your decision making as an incident commander on what you assign people to do? I mean, people don't want to. It's like the elephant in the room. Nobody wants to talk about the fact that like everybody's not the same. Like people show up, and you got to have a comfort level with those people if you're sending people in to do maybe more dangerous duties, than setting up rehab. Right. There's certain amount of trust you have to have in those people, and so how much does that knowledge of those people come into play in your mind, and just knowing where they are with training and development and in your own organization and with other organizations? Do you kind of have to play that in your mind of like, hey, this person can probably do this, but maybe this person not so much, and when you're making those decisions, how do you make those tough decisions on where's that line? Where's that line of what I can send them to do and what I can't send them to do? Is it maybe better, have this crew do this instead of that crew? And it's, I guess what I'm getting at is that's a dilemma, right?
Sure is.
Things have to get done, but you got to be able to kind of have confidence that the people you're assigning those tasks to have the training and the ability to carry out that task. So in your setting, do you find it kind of that battle in your mind of like, okay, I can give this to them, but not them. I need to have this crew. Oh, that crew's 5 minutes in. Oh man, they're 5 minutes out. I really need this crew to do this task. Does that play into your decision making? And when you're setting up for fire attack, water supply, search, ventilation, how do those things kind of weigh in your mind? What are the things that go through your mind when you're pulling up on scene like that and making those decisions? And how much does prior knowledge and training come into that decision when you're assigning tasks?
Yeah, it certainly is a challenge. And a lot of times, when I'm at work, I'm sitting in a car. I run a battalion there. So I'm sitting in a car and I'm giving out commands. And I'm doing it with firefighters that I know that train. All the departments, they're all full-time departments, and they all do their training. Well, out here we don't get that luxury. So a lot of times, if I'm running the command, I will bring the crew up to me, and I read their eyes. If I give them a task and I can see it in their eyes that they can't, they oh my gosh, they're scared of what they're about to do. I'll either assign it to another crew that may be there, or and talk to that crew to make sure that they are okay with this. But there has been times where I have taken and transferred command to another officer, and I'll take my own crew and do it myself if I have to, just because I know, and by the look in their eyes, that they are not comfortable with doing what I've asked them to do.
I really like that you bring that up, like having that presence to know, like you can tell when you give people an order, whether they're like chomping at the bit and like, we got this, like you can see it in their eyes, or whether there's doubt there, or even worse in some cases, like, holy cow, like I don't think I can't do this. That's such a critical part, like the human aspect of command that people know. Nobody talks about that, a lot. I mean, they do talk about it, but in the rural setting, sometimes it's like, well, we just got to make do with what we have. Well, I think when you have less people, it's even more important that the people you are giving tasks to, that they, that you have confidence in that they can do it, and that they have confidence that they can do it. Because the last thing you want to do is send them into a situation where they, not just, I'm not saying there's always an element of discomfort, when you're in a challenging situation like that, but if they've never been trained or had that in their Rolodex to go down that road, you're setting them up, for failure as an instant commander if you give them that task and they carry it out. And then conversely, I mean, what does that actually do in the operation if they get themselves in trouble or somebody else in trouble because they're not, comfortable doing the task, right? And so, like, that's the thing people forget, in the rural setting, the volunteer setting, is these people are here, not because they have to be because they're getting a paycheck, right? They're there because they want to help. But the reality of it is, when they're working a full-time job, 40, 50, 60 hours a week, and have families and things like that, the amount of time, they can be great people, fantastic people, but the amount of time that they can dedicate to the fire department, to training and things like that, may be, not ideal, not what they would like, not what you would like. And so knowing your people, I guess, is what I'm trying to hit on here, is understanding, obviously if you know the people you're working with, that makes it a little bit easier because their level of training, what they've gone through, that they know your SOGs. But when you're working with other people's people, that's a whole other element of, like, you do have to kind of look at the body language. What is the look in their eyes, the look on their face, and if they start to carry out a task, does it look like they're going in the right direction with it? And being able to, maybe give some guidance there if need be, or, reassign them all together and say, hey, you know what? I don't think we're on the same page with what's going on here. Let's pull it back. And it takes a lot of, I think, a lot of humility on both parties' part to recognize, like, there's this mindset, well, just get it done, push. Well, right. If they don't have the tools in the toolbox to get it done, no matter how good intended you or they may be, it's not going to happen successfully more often than not if you put people in a situation where they're just outside of their comfort zone, outside of their wheelhouse of what they are confident they can get done. And so, like, I think, like, that's what I want to really talk about here is when you are setting up trainings too, like, that's the other thing too. Do you find that how you set up trainings are different in your volunteer department versus your career department?
Sure.
What are some of the things that you try to kind of do maybe in the volunteer setting, in the rural setting versus the suburban setting? What are some things, like, when you're setting up a training drill, that you kind of are looking at and trying to accomplish? Do you tend to add more layers in your career department than you would maybe in the volunteer setting? What does like your typical drill look like in your volunteer department? What are you trying to accomplish? Is it shorter than maybe your career department? Is it, are the guidelines maybe a little bit more like rudimentary, like, hey, let's stick to the basics here? Whereas in your career department, maybe you throw a few more wrinkles in there. What does that look like when you're putting those drills together?
Yeah, that's exactly back to the basics a lot in the role setting. I do want to be clear, though. There's a lot of great firefighters out here in the rural setting, and in fact, at Loveland, there's probably 10 or 15 that we've brought from the rural setting because I've worked with them or I've taught them, and there's a lot they've taken classes and they've impressed me. So I let the chief know, hey, we need to get this guy or this girl and get him on here. So I just wanted to be clear that.
Yeah, no, not taking away from the volunteer guys at all, because like I think there are some real, and you're absolutely right. Going around the country training, like there are some really plugged in volunteer firefighters. I think like we're talking holistically though.
Right, holistic, different story, right?
But and I think it's just a matter of like time. When you look at it, it's just
it's
hard to expect the same thing, out of somebody who can only give you four hours a week. Versus somebody who's there 56 hours a week, like on average, like it's just a different amount of time available to work with that person, I guess. And that's the reality for a lot of short staffed departments is, you kind of have to, I've seen this all the time where I feel like sometimes guys come in and they want to do like all this elaborate stuff. And it's like, man, you gotta hammer the basics first, right? Can crawl, walk, run. You can't just throw people out on the track and say sprint. That's just not, it's not a recipe for success. And, I live in a rural area, where I'm out here in Wapaka County, which is, the city is a little over 6,000 people. But the township that I live in is maybe not even 2,000. It's all farmers around us,
right.
A lot of farmland and woods and things like that. And so, that's who's coming to my house, when it's on fire. And so I think like the reality of it is though, like, a lot of those guys that are volunteer firefighters are farmers. They're especially during harvest, man. They're gone. They're busy.
Gone, they're not around, right?
And so it's like they want to help. Obviously, they want to help their community, and but the time commitment is just it's not that they're not committed. They love their department. They love their community. But it's unrealistic, I think, to sit there and say, well, I need you to be doing this advanced 7-layer RIT drill. Flawlessly, and I've seen you twice in the last 4 months.
Yeah,
because you've been out harvesting crops and taking care of your family. Like, I think that's the thing that I think one of the biggest differences that I've noticed is you just have to be realistic with how you set up drills, right? And you have to understand your audience and who you're dealing with. If you got that guy that's in the volunteer system that's is there able to commit, they're there almost every night of the week, 4 or 5 nights a week, that are there on every Saturday drill, man, and like they're plugged in just by sheer time commitment. Most of the time those folks are going to have a little bit better grasp on what's going on than maybe someone that can only give you a few hours a month. And I think that's the dichotomy of the volunteer fire service in 2024 is very challenging, because you may have somebody who is able to be there a lot more than somebody else, and it doesn't make them any less a member of your organization. You just got to know what they can and can't do. And drilling, it's a balance, right? Because you want to give the people that are hungry enough to keep them moving forward, right? But you also don't want to lose the guys that are only able to give you a few hours a week, that are maybe not able to give you the same amount of time. So you want to balance that out, right? In the career department setting, if you're gearing all your drills to the high octane top 10%, the rescue guys, the guys that are in the truck company that, or whatever, the dialed in, the veteran guys, and you got rookies that are still trying to figure out how to mask up in a timely fashion and get the line not knotted up at the front door and stuff like that. There is that balance, right? And I've seen that in career departments where, they want to make this super elaborate, almost impossible drill. And it's like, we forget sometimes it's even in career settings to keep it basic, hammer the fundamentals over and over and over. And so I'm just curious, like where you're at, what are some of the things that you guys try to kind of really, when you're setting up, you said you're doing training officer stuff in your organization. What does that look like when you're setting up, let's say, a year? What are some of the big topics that you try to kind of hit on in both organizations? And what are the things that, the big takeaways that you try to emphasize in your respective roles in those organizations?
Yeah, for the most part in this area, it's hose line deployments. Because they don't get the practice like we do in the suburban setting. So we do that a lot, and we do a lot of pump operation, drafting. How to get that water from different places other than hydrants, and auto education. We do a training. We do one training every month, and then I offer more things if they want to. And every once in a while, we'll get a person or two that contact me. Hey, can we come up here and do some training on this and that? And we'll do that above and beyond. And when I do that, I'll put out a message to everybody. I send out a text message to everybody and say, hey, I'm going to be doing this training with this person. If you want to come up and participate, you're more than welcome to it. And there's another group of people that we deal with in the community, or in the rural community, and that's some of the farmers. You mentioned farmers earlier. Farmers, they know how to fix things. They if they're running their farm, something happens, they're really good about figuring something out to fix it. And we have a lot of farmers in this area that we may not get to see them that much, but when the tone does drop and they show up, you can guarantee, I know that farmer will be able to figure out what I need done. And that's another group of people that I like to see show up on the scene.
Yeah. I mean, they're workers, right?
Yeah.
And that they have some mechanical aptitude, and they're problem solvers by nature because they're dealing with equipment all the time, machinery. Let's talk about some of the call. When you're running calls in, say, the rural setting, some of the things that you may experience that you don't necessarily see in the suburban or urban setting. What are some type of challenges or call types, response challenges that you've run into in your time there that you maybe don't see that often in your suburban setting or talking, you talk to a lot of guys from around the country that are urban settings and stuff like that as well. I feel like it seems like the calls are different in the country.
They sure are. Yeah.
Yeah.
High-speed crashes, in my suburban department, we have a couple interstates that, have some, but it's only for a couple miles and it's straight as can be. Well, out here, there's a lot of curved roads and narrow roads, and everybody's going at least 55, if not more, on these back roads. And when they crash, with intensity compared to what I see in my suburban setting.
Oh yeah. Yeah. High mechanism, injury type stuff. I mean, one of the things that kind of came to mind, talk about farmers, farm injuries, whether it's a tractor rolling on somebody, someone getting caught in a combine, augers, problems with people falling in a silo. We've all read stories, seen videos of people making mistakes with silo rescues, getting into those situations with limited oxygen. Those type of incidents happen. I would argue, while they don't happen a lot, you're more likely to see stuff like that in the rural setting, as opposed to, in the urban or suburban setting. Even a lot of your hazmat stuff, your farmers are, anhydrous ammonia is a big thing that's used in the farming community. A lot of your nitrates and fertilizers and things like that. There's a lot of those type of things that are utilized in that environment that maybe you just don't see as much in your suburban setting.
I'm a member of two different rescue teams out here, one in Highland County, which is in the rural setting, and I'm Hamilton County USAR team, which is the Cincinnati area, the greater Cincinnati area. And we have more rescues on that Highland County team than we ever do with the Hamilton County team, just because of the hazards that are out here. We get called out to Hamilton County for, searching for a person, someone's missing and things like that. We're out here, it's someone stuck in an auger. We had a plane that landed into a tree. We had to climb up, do a rope systems. So I mean, we do a lot more rescue out here than I get in my suburban area.
Well, and that's the thing too. Think about what you're running in. Those incidents with on the initial alarm. In the suburban setting or the urban setting, you're getting all these people thrown at it. You may have specialized resources, truck company, maybe a rescue coming from either your organization or a nearby organization, USAR team, whatever, tends to be more resource heavy in those settings than in the rural setting where, it may be a chief in a pumper, a tanker, maybe a couple first responders in POV, depending on where you're at. And you got to still figure it out. You got to figure out a game plan and get the right resources rolling and start setting stuff up. And, the truth is when you're running those type of incidents with limited resources, you got to get pretty creative sometimes, right? I mean, that's something that, people think, well, we're going to call the big boys. They're going to come in. Well, that team may be an hour plus before they can mobilize and get out there. So what are you doing in that hour time? You can't just sit there and twiddle your thumbs. You got to at least start getting, some communication, trying to figure out a game plan, getting, intel to start setting up for that stuff. So, when you're running in your volunteer organization and you get a call like that, what are some things that you kind of go through your kind of checklist of what are you trying to accomplish on the front end of those type of incidents? Let's say you get a guy, caught in an auger. What is your kind of go-to game plan for at least starting to stabilize the incident command, getting the right resources? Can you handle some of that stuff with your equipment that you have available? Or is that something that, where do you kind of pump the brakes, say, hey, this is kind of over our heads. We need more people here versus, hey, we could probably start to figure this out. Do you have a lot of those incidents where you're like, hey, we're going to get people rolling, but a lot of times you're able to kind of work through it, figure it out, disentangle that person or handle those problems with local resources? Or is that something that you feel like more often than not, you do have to get outside resources to come in and mitigate it? Where's that line in your mind as a chief showing up in that organization for what you feel comfortable doing with your limited staffing and resources?
Yeah, I'm lucky here at Fayetteville. We have 4 people that work at the same department I do, and I have 8 rescue techs that are members of Fayetteville Fire Department. Now, not every mutual aid company will have that in this area, and what we train them to do is to lock out, tag out, just get things ready for the team that is coming to help out. So stop what their goal is before the team gets there is to stop it from getting worse and try not to make it worse ourselves. So we have a pretty good communication with our dispatch to know that when they're dispatched those type of runs, to go ahead and get the team activated. They don't have to wait for an officer to call for somebody, and we can always turn them back if we get the situation mitigated before they get there.
Now, do you ever have incidents where an officer isn't available to respond right away in the organization?
We sure do. We have that. Okay. Yeah, when we have senior firefighters, and everybody knows that, they go by the seniority or the mindset of the firefighter. There may be someone who's only got 2 years on the job, but they work full time somewhere else, and then you have a firefighter that's been there 15 years that only shows up once or twice a year. There's kind of a lineup of, top to bottom on, we know what firefighters are the senior firefighters per se.
Now, do you guys do any kind of like ICS training for your firefighters to kind of make sure that they have an understanding of, hey, this is who you need to call. This is how you're going to, take command, set up, perimeter, like you said, kind of lock out, tag out, start that process. Do they feel pretty comfortable with ICS and handling the radio communications? Because I can tell you, like in a lot of career departments, especially, more established in maybe slightly larger organizations, if you're a firefighter, you're not really talking on the radio. Right. You're not expected to do anything with command. You're not giving a size up. You're not doing any of that stuff. But like you said, in your volunteer organization, it may be just a couple firefighters showing up. Initially, may not be a chief officer or a company officer available. Do you find that is something that you have to drill on pretty often with those guys, just to make sure they're comfortable with that stuff? And you mentioned some of those guys work in other places. Obviously, that's a huge value to the organization if you have guys that have experience elsewhere. Yes. But how do you kind of blend that in your organization? Like, what is the line of expectation? Is every member expected to give a size up and take command? And how do you guys work your command structure there?
Yeah, so when we have that a lot, where just a couple of firefighters all shows up, and for one, I have a card that I put in each apparatus, so they have a guideline, because we can have 10 incident command trainings a year, but they still may not show up to any of them. It's hard to make things mandatory for our members because they got other jobs. So what they'll do is they use that card as a guideline, and if they have to, they can give they know all of everybody knows all the officers' phone numbers, and they'll give them a call and what do I need to do? We have that quite often to where 2 firefighters show up or 3 firefighters show up and they don't know what they need to do. They'll make a phone call. And we have very good communication with our mutual aid companies to where if an officer from that department shows up, they're to take command. It doesn't matter if it's their jurisdiction or not.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. And, I think speaking of jurisdictional stuff, I worked in a place and a lot of places around me right now, whereas basically if you ran, let's say, mutual aid with a department and a mutual aid company got there first, the expectation was, regardless of the rank of the person showing up for the other, the department that's jurisdiction is in, they're basically in charge. Is that something you guys run?
We used to do that years ago, and we just did away with that because of too many times of the same incident we talked about. 2 firefighters show up, and I have a chief from a neighboring department that's there. Let that person that's trained to do that job do that job.
What a concept.
Yeah.
What a concept. Yeah. No, it's funny, man, because turf wars are a thing.
Yeah, they are. They used to be real bad here, but over the last 10 years, 15 years, they've gotten really, really good.
That's encouraging to hear. Yeah. I mean, it's just, to me, it's like, what's best for the citizen, right? That's exactly what we claim that we're here, obviously to take care of the citizen. What's best for them. At the end of the day, I think teamwork goes a lot farther. Collaboration goes a lot farther, especially when you're already short resources to begin with. Standing in the yard having a pissing contest about who's in charge is the last thing that needs to happen.
Right.
And
the community doesn't care what it says on the side of the truck.
No, they just want people to show up and fix their problem. And
yes.
I think that's what people got to remember, and I think sometimes, the tendency, is, well, this is our jurisdiction. Well, what do we have in turf wars here? I mean, what is this like? Right. What's the gangs of New York? But it's funny because it's not as bad as it used to be. I feel like it's gotten better. The organizations across this country have gotten better. But I mean, I remember coming on the job, almost 2 decades ago and reading stories in different trade magazines or online forums of people getting in fist fights in the front yard, pulling, mask off guys' faces, pulling hand lines out of people's hands to go fight the fire and, kicking them in the bushes. I was like, is it really like that?
My grandfather used to tell me stories all the time when they would show up, they would fight in the front yard to see who got to fight the fire. And that was back in the 70s, of course, the 60s and 70s, but still that's nuts to believe to hear that, you would fight in the front yard to see who got to fight the fire. Meanwhile, it's blazing in the background, It's just nuts.
Stuff that just makes you shake your head sometimes. It's different times, but it's I think just get your thoughts on this. While we're on that note, the importance. We talked about training our own people. Working to try to extend that hand to our mutual aid partners and trying to do joint trainings and things like that. But in the limited staffing scenario, which is, like I said, 80% of the fire service, 80+% of the fire service. Probably closer to 90% if you really want to get down to it. Most of us could argue that even a lot of our urban systems are short-staffed.
Yep.
The truth is, you get a lot more done when you work together. It's synergistic effect. Knowing your strengths and weaknesses. We talked about that earlier in the show, of knowing your people, understanding their strengths and weaknesses, understanding which crews, hey, you know what? This is probably not the task for that particular crew or that particular person, right? That takes time, right? That takes time to get to know people. Takes time, and it takes humility to, also know your own limitations, to say, hey, I'm not comfortable with that. Or that's not something I've trained on. I don't feel very good about that. In case in point, ventilation, right? There are organizations that go to the roof a lot. and they're really, really, really good at it. Some of them, and there are departments that I can tell you that don't go to roof hardly ever. And I can tell you that even in those departments that have good firemen, that maybe even they go to a decent amount of fire. If you don't do a decent amount of roof work and training and preparation, your comfort level going on a 612 pitch at 2 o'clock in the morning to cut a vent hole is probably not going to be great. You're not going to be as effective. You're not going to be as efficient. You're probably not going to be as confident as the crew that does that a couple times a month.
Right.
And I think that's where we have to be realistic with our training, realistic with our people, knowing what they can and can't do. We all know them. We all know we got members in our departments that are more plugged in than others. And like, I think that's not a slam on anybody. I think that's just being realistic with what you have, the resource pool that you have. There are certain people that just are better at certain things. I can tell you right now, I am not a rope guru. If we go into a rope incident, I know enough to help. I know enough to be, not completely in the way, but I'm not going to be the guy if someone's got a high angle rescue that's putting all this together. I know that's a weakness that I have, that I try to learn as much as I can. I try to be helpful, but I know that that's not something that is in my wheelhouse of, I probably shouldn't be the lead guy saying, this is how we need to set this up and do this. Right. And that, there's no shame in saying, I'm not that guy, and I think that's something I think in the rural setting, when we talk about fireground considerations, we have to be realistic with what we can do with the resources that we have on scene.
Yeah.
When you pull up, there's this idea of like, oh, we're going to split search. Well, if you only got 2 people on the rig,
split with what? Yeah.
You're very limited on what you can do with 2 guys. Not saying you can't make a difference, but I think one of the big ones, and I want to get your thoughts on this, because this is always one I hear this emotional testing sometimes. I hear this, at the kitchen table, you show up and you're on a 3-man pumper engine, whatever, and that's all you got for the first 3, 4, 5 minutes. And you get there and there's cars in the driveway and it's the middle of the night. Do you go for search or fire attack? Okay, take that same variable and say, oh, someone says they're in that bedroom. Again, do you go for search or fire attack? And I always, my answer is always, it depends.
Yeah.
But, I want to get your thoughts on, and when you're rolling up, let's say with 3 guys on a pumper in the rural setting, how do you pick your poison? Where do you pick your battle, draw your line, in the life safety category, when you're sitting there going, okay, do we go put this bedroom fire out and then search, or do we go for the rescue, knowing that the fire is going to grow while we're not putting water on this thing? Or can I have one guy put a line in this window and spray some water while we go do a VES? I mean, where are those kind of, in your mind, when you're walking through that algorithm at 2 a.m, where do you kind of tend to lean in that scenario? And do you find that, the people on your rig obviously dictate what you can and can't do? We've talked about that. But more often than not, what do you feel is the path that you would probably lean towards? I know, right? I just want to get your thoughts on this, because I think people on, oh, you need to go for the rescue. Well, do you?
Right. Yeah. So we search while we fight fire. So it's going to be pulling the line and taking that with us. The only time we will search without a line in the rural setting is if it's a VES. Like mom is saying, my baby is in that window right there, or there's an elderly person that's their bedroom. They're not ambulatory. We will do a VES that way. Otherwise, we're taking the line in with us and we're searching on our way. And if we come up on somebody, we stop, we drop the line and get the person out.
Yep. No, I think that's, more and more, I'm glad to hear you say that, because I think that the engine search has to be normalized in rural and suburban settings.
I agree.
When you don't have a ton of people to throw at it and you don't have a confirmed, like, my baby's in that window, right? More often than not, and people don't want to hear this, but more often than not, like, taking that line to the seat of the fire and putting water on the fire is the right decision, right? Unless you have a known location. Again, it's searching offline as you go. If you find somebody, pull them out. Obviously, you're not going to leave them in there. But sometimes you may have to. I mean, if they're a large patient, you got a pump operator and 2 guys on a line. It may be, hey, we're going to isolate this victim in this room over here because they're 400 pounds until we get somebody in here. the fire's right there. Let's put this thing out real quick.
Let's put it out.
And then, and we can close the door, open the window, let it start self-ventilating, then we'll come back and get this guy out. Right. Yeah. And I think like that's where people have to kind of be thinking. Firefighters, you can't just be this robot like I only do, I always do. This always and never mind, I think, gets us in trouble, especially in limited staffing. But the answer, I mean, we got the fire putter outer in our hand, and I think that the data has shown two things that have direct correlation to positive outcomes for our civilians, and that is put the fire out and get the victims out as quick as possible. And sometimes putting the water on the fire is the best solution on the front end. I think was it Keokuk, Iowa, where the line of duty death, where they had a fire in the back first floor kitchen, and they went for the rescue up the stairs. The fire cut them off, and line of duty deaths because they didn't go for fire attack. They went for rescue. Nobody was behind them to take the line. They end up getting cut off. And so, like in that case, what would have been a simple, room and contents fire turned into a fatality fire. For firefighters that are on that line or were on the line because they didn't go for the fire attack. And it's not a throwing rocks. I mean, they were in rescue mode in their mind, like this is where we're going. But I think one of the lessons learned was like, hey, maybe, at a minimum, have one of the members stay at the stairs with a hose line and hold the fire in check, buy some time for this search and rescue to take place. But you got to be realistic, right? If you got 3 guys and that's all you have for 10 minutes, they're not going to be able to, do a complete, fire attack, complete primary, ventilation, forcible entry, water supply. Like it's just, you got to kind of pick your poison and know what you can do with the resources that you have. And, I think like that's probably the hardest thing for people in the rural setting and suburban setting to wrap their minds around is we run these scenarios, especially I see this all the time in promotion testing. You got this unlimited resource pool. And I'm going to send this engine here, this truck there, and they're all right on top of each other. Mm-hmm. Okay. That's nice.
Yeah.
But
setting, they're doing that as well. They're just doing it with different companies. They're fighting fire and they're searching at the same time.
Right.
Yeah.
Yep. No, it is, I think like that's one of the things that people forget sometimes is, that's great. The textbook answer is, we're going to start fire attack and search almost simultaneously.
Yep.
Well, how do you do that with 3 guys? Well, the engine search, right? Going to the seat of the fire, put water on the fire, and searching off that line as you go it yields more often than not the best bang for your buck in the rural setting, right? Is if we can put this fire out, it's a 1 or 2 bedroom fire, and we can stop it dead in its tracks. We're winning, man. We're winning. And
a room and content fire, we will, you put the fire out, and I'm a big component of hydraulically ventilating.
Yeah. Yep.
Let the nozzleman hydraulically ventilate while the second firefighter or officer goes off the line and starts doing a search.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. And guys will say, well, you guys aren't in communication or you're not, in contact. Well, I can talk to them pretty easy. Hey, I'm going to peel off in this. I'm going to peel off in this room real quick. Hey, keep putting water on the fire. Hit the hot spots. Once I feel confident as an officer, if I feel confident that nozzleman has got control of that situation, I'm good, right? Hey, man, I'm going to peel off here. I'm going to peel in this room. I'm going to start searching back from the line here. Are we going to clear the whole house right away? Probably not. But everything on the way to that fire, in vicinity of that hand line, and he knows that, hey, it should take 30 seconds for him to search this room. All right. If I don't hear from him in about 30 seconds, I'm going to be like, hey, you all right?
Right.
You know what I'm saying? And so like having that heads up to kind of be in contact that way. It's good to see, I when I first came on the job, man, like you had to be right on top of your partner, man. Like you couldn't lose contact. And it's good. Well, this is like, that's great if you have like 40 people throw at a fire. But when you don't have all those people, man, like let's be realistic.
Right.
Like, we can still talk.
3 points of contact. You see them, touch them, or see it, or talk to them.
Yep. That's it.
If I can talk to you from the other room, we're in contact with each other.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So let me ask you this. You mentioned the water supply component earlier, and obviously anybody that knows you may or may not nerd out a little bit on some rural water supply operations. It's kind of your thing. You're kind of really into the pump operation stuff, which I love. I definitely enjoy every bit of it because I feel like sometimes the pump operators don't get the love that they deserve on the Fireground. And I tell people all the time when I'm going around the country, like, driver operators are absolutely, like, they're the glue that makes it all work, man. They hold it all together, because nobody talks about great driver operators. They only talk about the ones that run out of water and have problems all the time. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
It's only the problem children that get, any kind of rap.
Yeah.
But the truth is, I mean, a good driver operator can absolutely be a force multiplier on the Fireground, both getting and maintaining water, but also from a tactical perspective, whether it's getting a second line on the ground, ventilating a window to alleviate some smoke for our guys, or getting scene lighting up, communicating with other units coming in, throwing a ladder up for the guys, for egress or whatever the case may be. Working drivers, in my opinion, are force multipliers. I know you do a lot of teaching in the driver operator side of things. What is your philosophy with driver operators, both in your rural setting and your suburban setting?
So yeah, the driver is responsible from the rig to the front door or the entry point. So they need to be proactive. They're probably going to be the busiest person in the first 5 to 10 minutes. That's what our operators do. So I hate to see operators, get out there, they charge the line, and then they lean up against the truck. They need to be doing some work. That includes getting a water supply of some type, whether it be, for us out here, it's usually a nurse tanker or a draft of some type from a static water source. And not only that, just listening to the radio. That's one of the things that our operators need to do, and whether it be at work or here in the rural setting, is listening to the radio. And when they hear they need a fan to the front door, go ahead and get that fan out and bring it to them. That helps build that reputation to be a great operator.
Yeah, being proactive is enormous. I really feel like drivers kind of have to be a couple steps ahead, right? They got to know what their crew is going to need both now and in 5 minutes, right? What are they going to be asking for? And I always tell people, like, let's take a case in point. Single family ranch house, let's say 2,000 square foot ranch, right? And you got an attic fire. I tell people this all the time. What do you need? They're going to have to pull ceiling.
Yep.
You know that. They're going to need, the line on the ground. They're going to need probably a second line. They're probably going to need, at some point, some sort of, opening up of the attic area. What can you do? I mean, whether it's bringing some hooks to the door, getting the second line on the ground, throwing a ladder up so, the next crew in can, if need be, if you're a department that opens up the roof, I mean, having that stuff in place already. So the guys know, hey, like I said, post knockdown, if you're a department that uses a PPV fan post knockdown to ventilate smoke, already having that fan at the door. Hey, boss, fans at the door whenever you guys are ready for it, right? Or communicating ventilation needs. Hey, we're 3 guys on this rig and we show up and my 2 guys are in, side because we got a rescue situation and they're fighting fire and going for a rescue. Listening to where they're at, right? Where's that fire at? Where is it going? Condition changes. Hey guys, it's not looking too good, right? Like all of a sudden, you see some really angry smoke coming from the soffit or whatever, or the front door. Hey, just so you know, we got to change the smoke conditions. Being that pseudo safety officer, but also listening to where hey, we got a victim. We're coming out the Bravo Charlie, bedroom window. Well, who's going to receive them? There ain't nobody else there,
right?
It may be the driver that has to go.
It'll be the driver,
get that victim. And so training drivers. I love it, man, because it's so much more than pulling levers.
Yeah.
And getting guys to actually think about from a tactical perspective, what can I do to soften this building? What can I do to make this operation more successful? Right. That's the first part of it. And then the other part of it is actually knowing what the heck's going on in your pump panel, knowing what's going on with your water supply. How much, how much water do you have in your tank? How far will that get you? In the rural setting, that is critical, man. That is absolutely critical because you don't have hydrants every 300 feet,
right.
And your second due may not be 2 minutes behind you, right? You mentioned it earlier. You may be setting up dump tanks. You may be doing a nursing operation. There's a million different variables that come in there. And I really believe in the rural setting, you actually have to be better with water supply, in my opinion. Than
I agree.
We can cheat the water supply in the urban setting a lot easier. There's no faking it in the rural setting. Like if you don't have your ducks in a row, you can absolutely cause the incident to fail. You can absolutely make it come to a screeching halt. And so I want to get your thoughts on when you're talking water supply, like what is your kind of go-to typical water supply operation look like in the rural setting for you guys? When you pull up, I know you talk about the rural hitch quite a bit. Heard you speak a couple of times. I mean, is that something you guys do pretty routinely? Is that something you guys are pretty comfortable with? And if so, can you kind of describe that for listeners that maybe don't know what that is?
Right. So for one, here at Fayetteville, we do the nurse tanker operation. So we're going to show up with 1,000 gallons on our engine.
Okay.
And then we have a 3,000 gallon tanker that that's our second apparatus out all the time.
Okay.
So that gives us 4,000 gallons of water to play with. And in my opinion, if you can't put it up with 4,000 gallons, it was a defensive fire. That's one of the things I preach. So our operators will show up on the scene. They pull the 5-inch or our supply line for whatever it is. And the nurse tanker, it will set up right behind the first due apparatus, unless it's a long driveway. If it's a long driveway, that engine will lay a tail. And then as soon as the tanker gets there, it is the click in and start giving it its tank water to the first due truck. While that's going on, the operator of the tanker is setting up dump tanks behind the tanker to create a draft or get a draft from the next due tankers coming in. So when that second tanker gets there, they're going to dump their water in the dump tank, and that operator of the first tanker will create a draft and push forward to the first due truck.
Okay. And so, when you guys are doing that, first of all, I like if it's more than 4,000 gallons of water, you're probably just defensive from the get-go, right? Yeah, 4,000 gallons of water, well placed in the right, you put it in the right spot.
Put it where it needs to go, right?
You can do a lot of damage.
Yeah.
Especially in the residential setting, So let's say you do get to the operation, though it is a defensive fire, or it is a large building, commercial building, something along those lines. When you're going, what do you guys have a water supply card that you would call for extended water supply operations? Like, what does that look like in your organization? I know some departments have like a tender card that they would call dispatch and, hey, dispatch, this card or whatever, and you get X amount of tenders coming to the scene, and what does that look like for you guys if it's beyond, let's say, a 2-tanker operation where you need sustained water and it's coming from a distance? How do you guys tend to set that up?
Yeah, so we set up with automatic mutual aid companies. Every department for us, except one, has at least a 3,000 gallon tanker. And on our initial structure fire dispatch, we're going to get 3 tankers, 2 engines, and a ladder. So we're going to have at least 9,000 gallons in tanker water only coming towards that fire. And if we need more, we just ask for however many more tankers we need. Luckily, again, we're fortunate in this area. We are very tanker heavy. I can get 20 tankers here if I need it, within 20 minutes or so.
Now, when you guys are, drafting, do you guys kind of double tube drafting? I mean, is that something you guys do a fair amount where you're twin tube drafting?
The only time we're going to twin tube is on them large barn fires. Okay. It's like full of hay or things like that. For the most part, our fires are residential and in most cases. And if it's that case, if we don't need that extra flow, if we're not flowing to help out to accommodate a master stream, we're going to just use one tube. And
gotcha.
We can flow 1,500 gallons a minute out of that. So
sure,
and
that makes sense. So, obviously that would be a big water operation. What is some of the equipment? I think like especially suburban guys that are listening to this, I run into this all the time in my area. When you start talking about twin tube drafting or, triple tapping a hydrant even, people forget like, your apparatus kind of dictate what you can and can't do.
Right.
And so I want to just kind of talk just briefly about your apparatus setup, what you need to make that happen. Obviously from intakes, some limitations with intakes, hard suction hose, things like that. And then if you would, we can kind of segue that into maybe some of your primerless operations, and I don't know. Do you guys use turbo drafts at all in your area, or is that something?
So we have one department that has turbo draft, but for the most part, we don't.
Gotcha. Okay.
We have it's another water adductor. It's not a turbo draft because turbo draft is a brand name more or less. There's one from Folded Tank that does the same thing. We do have a couple of those, but we have never used it on an actual run. We trained on it a few times, but we have a pretty unique situation set up with our tankers to where luckily for us, we haven't had that enormous fire where we would have to do more than 2 tanks on the ground. And with the tankers that we have available, we don't usually have that problem where we need a turbo draft.
I got you. Yeah, I didn't know. I know some departments love them. They're in places where
I do love them when we need them.
Yeah, the beauty obviously is being able to use soft sleeve because most people don't carry unlimited supplies of hard sleeve.
Right.
That is nice, but I think people forget too, like the limitation, obviously, distance and flow through a turbo draft. Depending on where you're at, I mean, you're not typically getting more than 700 gallons a minute out of a single turbo draft, as a rule. And I think their website says like 670 gallons per minute. I think there's some variables in there that come into play. But it is a good tool. But when we're talking about like primerless operations, do you guys tend to do a decent amount of like burp draft training? Like, hey, if your primer fails, this is how you overcome that. Do you guys use jet assisted low intake, strainers? What is your typical setup for drafting look like?
Yeah, I train ours. We do the pressurized prime, which is a jet siphoning. That's how we use our prime. I train all the operators to be able to, if you're empty of water, you got to be able to use a primer. And if your primer happens to stop, then you just need to get someone to get you some water pushed into your tank so that you can what we call jet siphon. So that's taking the hard sleeve, hooking it up to the intake. We have a low profile strainer that has that jet siphon connection. And we have a 20-foot section of 1 3/4 that forces that water up into the intake. And then we just open up that intake slowly until we have all the air pockets out of it. And then we're in business.
It's always interesting to hear, because there are a lot of variations out there. And it's kind of cool to see some of the creative stuff that people have kind of come up with to overcome some of those issues. Mm-hmm. But I think, especially in the suburban setting, we don't draft a lot. And so like every year it's like, I feel like it's that, the thing, well, we have to do it because the training division says we got to do it every year.
Right.
It's like, guys, like, it's not this mythical thing, there's ways around it. But I think people too forget, how much, having a second large diameter intake comes into play there. If you are going to big water operations, doing a twin tube drafting operations, it's pretty dang hard already drafting if you don't have a gated intake that you can bleed the air to put that operation into effect.
Yeah, if you're going to use a twin tube, you need to have an intake valve on at least one of those. Yeah, it's just something you have to have.
Now, do you guys run front intakes on your rigs?
Our engine has a front intake, and our tankers have rear intakes as well.
Okay. So, and what are you guys able to flow out of those typically? I know rigs that I've had in the past that with front intake, we were pushing it to get more than 900,000 gallons a minute out of the front intake of those specific rigs.
On the average, the average, about 750 in the front because of all the bends and. Yeah. Now our rear intakes, we can get a little bit more because it's just a straight line in.
Okay. Yeah. Nice. Yeah. When we're talking spec and rigs, people say it's getting in the weeds or whatever, but I mean, plumbing matters. Plumbing absolutely matters. And people go, why do we need a front intake if it gets less water through it than my side intake on the midship? Well, what's the advantage of a front or a rear intake?
So it helps keep that single lane. So in the rural setting, we may have departments coming from either side, and they need to be able to dump into that dump tank. So a lot of times when we set up, we will set up on the roadway on the side of where the fire is. So if it's on the left, we're going to have everything in a single lane. So that dump tank will be set up right behind the tanker or the engine or whatever is the one pushing water to the first due apparatus.
So yeah, access becomes a big variable in the water supply game of being able to get rigs past to dump their water and things like that. When you guys, are setting up your water supply, let's say you've got an extended operation that you're going to maybe a long driveway, and the first engine lays that supply in as they go to the scene. How effective, like you got a 3,000 gallon tanker showing up, right, to supply them. And let's say you got 800 foot of supply line. Are you guys running 4 or 5, 6 inch? What is your supply line there?
5 inch. So we're losing a gallon a foot. So that's you got to keep that in your mind.
Yeah,
you're losing a gallon a foot when you're using that supply.
So that's another thing people got to remember, like what size supply line they're using, how much water is just to fill the line. Because if you have another 1,000 gallon engine pull up and you got 800 foot of 5 inch laid up a driveway, that maybe as the tanker's delayed and you got another 1,000 gallon engine, they're going to dump almost their entire tank just to fill the supply line to that first engine.
Right.
So it's something you got to keep in mind. Speaking of appliances and adapters and things like that, one of the things that I picked up over the last couple of years is realizing the intakes are not all the same.
Yeah.
And realizing the amount of water that you can get, that intake does become a limiting factor because they're pretty significant size difference in orifice or open waterway rather behind that valve on your various intakes. All the way from 3.5 inch, I think, up to 5 1/4 for an external intake, and a little bit larger for your integrated intakes and your internal intakes. But how does when you're speccing a rig, what is something you typically look at for intakes? Do you like an external aftermarket intake, or do you like one built into the rig? And what are the pros and cons of each of those? And what is kind of the minimum size that you want to try to get for your opening, your intake opening behind the valve?
Yeah, so we have 1,500 GPM pumps on pretty much everything. Yeah, on everything we have here. So I want at least a minimum of a 6 inch intake. I like the external intakes better than the internal, for the simple fact that, like, we have an engine that has the internal intake, and it's great until you get pressure on it, and then it won't open. So it don't have that power to where when the tanker or the engine pushing forward is giving you too much pressure, you will never, you can't get that valve open because of that, because of the pressure pushed up on that valve. Where on external intake, I have the manpower to be able to overcome that pressure, and I can force that valve open.
Yeah. What is I'm not like going for brand or anything, but like if you're speccing an apparatus for especially if you're going to be doing drafting operations in a rural setting, what are some things that they need to look for as far as fittings or connections and things like that? Because obviously you're not going to probably have a Storts connection on your intake for drafting. You're probably going to have a threaded connection. And do you find that what is typically spec'd for hard suction, I mean, there's a few variations out there for size and adaptability. What are some of the things that they need to consider when speccing those intakes, those adapters? And then another thing too is the gaskets. Pressurized versus suction gaskets are different, right? Those are things that you got to. And I can tell you, like, the more I dig into water supply, the more I realize, like, there's a lot of things that people don't really think about when they're speccing apparatus sometimes, and they just want to get a rig in service. But sometimes they tie their hands with the equipment that they put on it or the adapters and things like that. They don't really take into consideration what their operation is locally. And I've seen that even in my urban department, where it's like, oh man, it'd be nice to have that front intake back, but they took them away from us. We don't have them anymore. So it's like operationally, every time you change something on your rig, there's a give and take, right? They're good and bad. And no matter how big a supply hose, you could run 6 inch soft sleeve supply hose or hard sleeve supply hose. If your intake's choked down to 3.5 inches, that's your limiting factor. Or if you don't have the right gaskets, no matter how hard you whack on that thing, to get that hard suction put together, you're going to be up the creek without a paddle.
Yep. So for that piece right there, we always keep a saran wrap on our trucks so that we can create that seal for when we don't have those gaskets. And if you come to Fayetteville, you'll, believe it or not, you're going to find our intakes have Storz fittings instead of the threads, except one truck. And that's all because the person who ordered the intakes didn't put that in consideration. So we had to kind of make do with what we had. When I got the intakes here, I was excited for getting them, and I opened up the box and I'm like, "Are you kidding me? These have Storz fittings. They're supposed to have been thread." And it was the guy that ordered that type. So yeah,
it happens.
When you have someone ordering equipment, make sure the person knows what they're doing. Have a committee put together and think of these things, because now we have, if we're going to use that intake valve, we have a restriction. Instead of getting that full 6 inches of water coming in, it's restricted down to that Storz, that 5-inch Storz. So you're not going to be able to get the amount of flow in that intake like you'd want.
Well, and people think, well, I got a 5-inch hose. I've got a 5-inch intake, or I've got an LDH discharge. I can flow. I got a 1,500 gallon per minute pump. I can flow 1,500 GPM through this bad boy. It's not necessarily the case.
Not always the case if your equipment's not matched up. Also, people believe that, okay, I have a 1,500 GPM pump and I have a 3,000 gallon tanker, I can push 1,500 from my tank, and you can't, because most trucks have a 3-inch or a 4-inch tank to pump, and that's that's limited. When I designed our tanker, I made sure we put 2 4-inch tank to pump valves on it so that we can get that extra flow from our tank water.
Yeah. I mean, stuff that people don't even think about. You pull up and the boss says, "Oh, I want to put the RAM monitor in a 2.5 in operation," and you got a 3-inch gravity fed tank to pump.
Yeah.
NFPA says you only have to have 500 GPM, man.
Right. That's all you're going to get too.
Yeah. And and people get they get befuddled by well, why can't I flow these 2 lines? Well, you don't have enough water coming through that pipe.
And who do they blame? They blame the operator for not getting the water that they want.
Yeah.
It's not the operator's fault. It's who designed the truck.
Do you feel like there's in some ways we've dumbed down the pump operator position too much?
Yeah. We sure
where there's a lack of understanding? Because I feel like the more I travel around and do training stuff with different folks from around the country, man, it just seems like we have really taken the engineering out of driver engineer. A lot of guys, it's like if it ain't on the pump chart, man, they don't know. They don't know. And you go to places and people don't know what they can do. They don't know what they're capable of. They never push the limits of their system to know what their water supply is capable of. And people say, well, that's once, that's a 10-year fire. That's once every 10-year fire. Well, inevitably somebody's going to run that fire.
Yep.
And while I think we get kind of lulled to sleep with our room and contents, our pre-connect fires where a couple lines, we kind of get spoiled because 85-90% of the time, this is what we run. It works. It's fine until it doesn't.
Yep.
And
they do great with one line, but if you add anything more than that, they're done.
Right. And that's something that, I don't know what the answer is other than just trying to beat the drum, man, and try to get operators to be competent operators and really dig in and understand it's not just a stepping stone position. It is really essential that you understand how to get and maintain usable water and what your limitations of your specific apparatus are, because we can sit here and talk theory all day, but your apparatus, like the plumbing on your apparatus, the hose, the nozzles, the elbows, all these things, the intakes, the adapters, the pipe size, all those things, you can try as hard as you want, but physics is physics, and it's going to win the battle at some point, right? There's a point where it's like, no matter how much you try, to push more water through it, it's not coming.
Right. I teach operators to learn to listen to your pump. It tells you everything that's going on. And then you need to know what valves to open and or shut to fix that problem. We all know what it sounds like when it's operating perfectly.
Yep.
But when it's not operating perfectly, what's it sound like? And then it'll tell you what you need to do.
That's one of the things that over the last 4 or 5 years I've really started kind of hammering is troubleshooting.
Mm-hmm.
Because I think we you know, pull this lever, this happens, you know, A, B, C, boom, here's the formula for success. You know, and we train RIT and Mayday and all this stuff for fireground operations. But how often do we do that in the driver training, where we show people like, hey, if this happens, this is how you fix it, right? This is
Right.
how to overcome some of those problems when it doesn't sound right, when things are, you know, what is happening in that pump panel. When I hear cavitation, what does that sound like? What does that look like? What does that do to my lines? With our new rigs, what we're finding with our pucks that we have on our pumpers in the city is the technology when it's in PSI mode,
Mm-hmm.
the low water error like code.
Yeah.
You know, you could have water still left in there, and it's thrown, and you'll, you know, it'll start going haywire and shutting stuff down because the computer is basically tricked into believing that there's a problem. And so, like, it's amazing how many guys when you tell them like, hey, just switch it to RPM mode, you're fine.
Yeah.
They're like, what? What do you do?
Yeah.
That's old school. Like, yeah, you actually have to turn the dial. Like, you have to actually pay attention in and out. But I almost feel like in some ways, man, like the guys that came up on the old, you know, the pumps where you actually had to do some finessing and manually adjusting and, you know, slowly opening and closing stuff. That's actually probably a better way. If you can pump like that, then it's like a calculator, man. It's a great tool. But if that's your only tool and it fails, you're going to have problems, right? And so that's become a huge component of something, you know, that I've tried to really push the last few years. Is like, man, as operators, learn to troubleshoot. Because
exactly.
you're not, you know, and let's be honest, like most of the time, you're by yourself those first 10 minutes.
Mm-hmm.
You know, you don't have, it's not phone a friend. I can't call the captain and tell him to come back out here and be like, hey, bro, I don't know what's going on, right? So they kind of expect you to kind of roll with the punches, and you don't have somebody standing over your shoulder like, you know, hey, what do I do here? You kind of have to figure it out, and so like being able to kind of roll with the punches, you know, if you can, you know, manufacture some of those things in training, man, what you're so far ahead of most of the guys that are driving, because people just think, oh, I just, you know, I drive from point A to point B, pull a few levers, hit a couple presets, and we're good. And that's just, you know, the truth is that's really, you know, while we get away with that 90% of the time, those 10% fires are the ones that really kind of show the great operators from the not so great operators, right? That's where you kind of earn your money, so to speak, on the fireground, career or volunteer. And there's some guys that are wizards, man. You know, there's some guys that I look at and like, man, I don't know what you did, but you got to, you figured it out. You see some pretty creative stuff. I like what you said about the saran wrap for the gaskets.
Yeah, instead of changing out a gasket on a scene, just throw a thing of saran wrap on there. And she seals really good. We used to use duct tape, but you get that duct tape on the fittings and it gets sticky. So saran wrap, and I think I'm pretty sure Andy Sacadato is the one who showed me that trick, and it works wonders.
Yeah, no, I like that. That's something to add to the repertoire, the arsenal, you know, for driving. I mean, you just those little things, man, like in a pinch, is huge, you know, and being able to kind of fix stuff on the fly is kind of what you're expected to do. But you know, when you're talking again, like the rural setting, you know, we talk about water supply, we talk about kind of your typical setup. What is some pitfalls that you see a lot in that setting as far as operations and water supply and or both? What are some things that you see that is kind of a common mistakes or problems that people get themselves into? And what would you suggest to kind of maybe curtail some of those? Because I know in the suburban setting, there's things that I know that we're prone to do that we get by. It's one of those like what's the word I'm looking for, that normalization of deviance, where we kind of get away with it until we don't. But in the rural setting, what are some things that, you know, you've kind of seen both operationally and water supply and things like that tends to be one of the bigger problems, you know, that you, whether it's getting, you know, tunnel vision, running out of water, you know, being unrealistic with your personnel, whatever the case may be. You know, certainly in 30 years, you've probably run into a few hiccups along the way and things that you've seen that you kind of take note of and kind of, right, hey, we're not going to get down this hole. we're not gonna chase that rabbit, man. We got to stay on task here. And you know, so I just want to get your feedback on that a little bit.
Well, something that just happened to me last weekend. We had a fire right here in town, and in the rural setting, a lot of times your apparatus may sit in the bay for a month at a time without being worked. And if you have the tiniest little pinhole of a leak, or your packing is leaking, now all of a sudden, your valves are all shut, but over time that pump will eventually drain. And so when they show up on the scene expecting a pump is full of water, they go to charge the line and there's nothing comes out. So they pulled the tank to pump, but because that pump has got like an airlock to it, it won't let that water trickle down into the pump. And so now they're panicking because now they pulled a lever at that spot they thought was supposed to give them water, and it didn't give them water. So they forget to pull that primer to try to force that water in there. Because what happened is that the truck sat there for so long without water in it, the pump is now dry. So I teach the operators now, because of those things like that happen, is always pull that primer initially just to make sure that your pump is full when it's been sitting in the bay for a long period of time. At work, I don't have that problem because we do it every day. We do a truck check and the firefighters come out there and they run the pumps up. In the rural setting, you don't always get that.
Yeah, that makes sense. And, so in that setting, do you guys typically in the winter run your pumps with water in them yet, or do you run them dry?
Yeah, we leave them wet here because, there's so many gallons of water in that pump. It would take a long time for that to freeze solid. But when you drain a pump, you have a lot of crevices. You ever look at the inside of a pump, there's a lot of crevices in there. And if you drain the pump, you're never going to get all that water out. And now you have ice cubes, and then now it's clogging up your nozzle. We've had that when we used to drain our pumps here. All of a sudden you'd be flowing water, and all of a sudden it would just stop. And it was because the ice cubes got into your nozzle and stop the flow. So we found that it doesn't really get that cold here in Ohio. I can't speak for what it's like in Wisconsin and Minnesota. If you have like a 20-minute response time, it may freeze up on you. We don't have that issue here in Ohio, so we keep ours wet.
Yeah, I gotcha. Yeah, no, I mean it kind of surprised me. I mean, so we run our pumps wet in the winter in the city. Mm-hmm. I know some agencies up north I've heard run them dry, which whatever. I think it's important to remember then if that's the case, like you really kind of have to make sure, like you said, you're hitting that primer, make sure that water's, flowing where it needs to flow. Do you guys run, so we have these heat pans that we put in the winter underneath the pump panel, or underneath the pump, basically to keep heat in and keep it from freezing. Do you guys run that at all, or is that something
we don't have? We don't have those down here. No, I don't know anybody else that does down here either.
Yeah, it was kind of unique. I mean, obviously cut my teeth in Florida for a number of years, and then up here, back up north after years. So it was a learning curve. Hey, we got to put the heat pans in. Like, what are you talking about, man?
Well, I've seen some departments up in Alaska and even up in Canada where they have their the heat from the engine is blown onto the pump. So there's ductwork from the engine compartment that goes down to the pump, so it keeps that heater on the actual pump itself, so it keeps it from freezing.
Yeah, it's funny because like in Florida, we had the exact opposite problem. Like we couldn't keep them cool enough. We're trying to get them cold, man. It's like it's stinking hot,
right?
And then you come up here and I'm like, you want heat back in there? Okay, fair enough. So I mean, I think jurisdictionally, you just got to look at where you're at, right? And know what your operation is. One of the things that so talk about like things that happen. People in the spring forget to take the heat trays off, right? Well, now you get in the summer, it's 90 degrees.
Oh, yeah.
And you have overheating issues. And so like that's something that if you do run the heat pans, make sure they're coming off in the warmer months when summer starts to break a little bit, because you'll have the exact opposite problem. And we, overheating a pump can have catastrophic consequences, obviously, if you're not paying attention. So yeah, I mean, at the end of the day, I think, in a nutshell, to summarize kind of where we've been over the last hour and a half, man, is be realistic about what you have available, right? What your apparatus can and can't do, the number of people available that, who's getting on the rig with you. We talked about that operationally, how that impacts your decision to go or not go, assigning task. The engine search is a huge force multiplier in the rural setting. Being able to peel off that line and search absolutely is maximizing your personnel. We talked about some pump operation stuff. Obviously, having options, knowing your rigs obviously dictate that a lot. If you don't have a front intake, it's hard to. If all you have is side intake or side intakes, that's going to limit what you can and can't do, how you set up. Your operations for your strainers. I mean, we could get in. There's literally. I mean, you could spend 2 hours just talking about all the equipment, the variations and things like that. But I mean, if you're in an organization that has, turbo draft, be proficient with it. If you're in an organization that depends on mutual aid, in my opinion, it behooves you at least. I would say at least 2 or 3 times a year to get out with those partners and do a water supply drill. Because that's who you're going to be relying on for water, right? And bring them in for, if you're doing search drill or hose line drills or whatever, like periodically just knowing those people, seeing familiar faces goes a long way in having confidence to get the job done. And utilize your people. If you got farmers or people that are tradesmen that are in your department that are good at stuff, a lot of times they're pretty creative in a pinch to solve problems. And then finally, pay attention to how your rig is set up, the little things, the devil's in the details, right? It's the little things that kind of compound that cause problems. You mentioned the water draining out of the pump. As silly as that sounds, is something that simple could potentially derail if you don't know how to overcome that. So being proficient in troubleshooting, knowing how to determine, is it a problem on the intake side of the pump? Is it a problem with my pump itself, in the components inside my truck? Or is it on the discharge side of the pump? You mentioned the ice in the nozzle. What is your plan for overcoming that? And good drivers, that's this episode obviously is not really hard and heavy in that particular topic, but we talk about troubleshooting. A lot of times the driver can actually troubleshoot from the panel some of those issues, like where is this problem at? Is it intake, pump, or discharge side of the pump? And can start giving some feedback to the crews to, hey, check for kinks, check for debris in the nozzle, just by looking at their gauge and listening to what their truck is telling them. Because that's the thing too, is like, if you have a ruptured hose or something like that, you're going to see a little fluctuation in your needle, right, on your compound gauge, right? Whereas if it's a blockage, you're not going to have fluctuation. You may not, it's like the vacuum. You put your hand over a vacuum, what happens? The RPMs may go up, but the pressure's not dropping. It may actually climb a little bit, right? So I mean, knowing that, hey, check for debris in the nozzle, check for a kink, check for those are the things that drivers, can be kind of force multipliers in the Fireground and help keep their guys moving. And then finally, I think really just comes down to again getting out there and there's no substitute for training. There's no substitute for getting out there and learning and growing and talking to people. And I think that's really, in a nutshell, what I've taken away from our conversation over the last 90 minutes is, you got to get out there. You got to be realistic with what you got and who you got coming, and you got to just know strengths and weaknesses and what you can and can't do. And I think like that's the difference in the rural setting. Sometimes is it varies call to call on who you got showing up, time of day, all those type of things play into it. And so you kind of have to, in my opinion, you have to be on your game probably a little bit more than our urban counterparts, because you have to be able to figure it out with a lot less people, a lot less resources, in settings that are kind of unique, right? And whether it's a tech rescue incident, a vehicle accident, high mechanism of injury, structure fire, whatever the case may be, you don't have the luxury of throwing manpower at the problem.
Right. Something else, far as in a rural setting, is freelancing. We used to have a big problem with freelancing, and in a way I combated that was seating assignments. So when they show up, a firefighter that doesn't do this every day, you can put their mind at ease by letting them know before you get to the scene what their job is, and they should know what that job is before they get off the rig. So that helped out a lot with the freelancing.
I'm glad you brought that up, actually, because a lot of people say, well, riding assignments just for the big city. That's big city stuff.
Yeah. It works for them,
Yeah, I mean, how much more though? Like you said, if you can take some of that, initial guesswork out of it. If I know I'm on this rig doing, going to this type of call, I'm in this seat. This is kind of what is expected of this rig and this seating assignment. Man, that's huge, right? I mean, it's that plan A, right? It's that initial. Not saying there's not an audible that can be called if need be,
of course. Yep.
but having a framework from which to start, that is a mark of professionalism. I'm not talking about paycheck or not a paycheck. I'm talking about our mindset that we approach the fire department, right? Whether it's career, volunteer, combination, whatever the case may be, having a plan A and speaking the same language. I think that's an Aaron Fields thing, right? If we're not speaking the same language, we're not playing the same sport. I think that is absolutely huge. And I hear people kind of balk at the idea of doing that in the volunteer setting or the rural setting, but it just makes sense.
Yeah.
It just makes sense to have an idea of like, what is our structure? How are we expected to operate if we have X amount of people on the rig, on this type of call? It gives us that springboard to succeed, right? It gives us the template to say, hey, this is typically how we want to start the road that we want to start going down. And then, and I always tell people, well, I'll call an audible. Okay. Just make sure everybody understands what the audible is. Because if you call an audible and nobody knows what you're talking about, if you don't train with your mutual aid partners and you tell them to set up a roll hitch and they don't know what that means, you're probably not going to be successful, right?
Not going to be successful, right?
I'm so glad that you brought that up because it's refreshing to hear you say that having predetermined riding assignments and seat assignments and kind of an idea of like, hey, this is what we do. This is our operation. This is our kind of our plan A for this type of call. Because a lot of people, like I said, they balk at it and say, that's a city thing. Well, like you said, you hit it on the head. It works for them, right? How much more so with less people is it important that we have an understanding of what needs to get done and who needs to do it, right? And not just winging it and freelancing and doing our own thing. And, that's where you get duplication of effort, lack of communication. And again, you can take any NIOSH line of duty death report. And, especially it feels like 20 years ago, this was like every NIOSH line of duty death. It seemed like there was freelancing was involved in like 8 out of 10. I swear. Like it was all the time. Like, freelancing, lack of communication. Like it seems like it's gotten better over time, but people understand like there's an expectation. But I think having riding assignments kind of drills home that accountability of, hey, I expect you to do X, Y, Z. And if you're going to deviate from that, fine, understand why you're deviating and communicate it clearly so everybody stays on the same page. So we're not, doing things that are counterproductive to the scene.
Yeah, something we used to have happen we'd run out of water because we have 3 firefighters get off the truck and every one of them pulled a line. Well, meanwhile, no one's setting up water supply and this and that. So
sure,
it also cuts down a lot of needed communication because now the officer doesn't have to hold them by the hand and tell them, I want you to do this, this, or this. They have that idea before they ever show up on the scene. And if that firefighter is sitting in the nozzle seat, nozzle firefighter seat, and they don't know exactly what they do, they can ask the questions on the way to the scene. What do I need to do about this or this? And the officer can answer that before they show up.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's, if you do have that new member, I like that you mentioned earlier in the show, having that card, for whether it's command or, I've seen a lot of guys will do like laminated, like riding assignments too, for the seat. So if I'm sitting in the seat, and, I'm going to this fire extrication, whatever the case may be, I have an idea of what I'm grabbing and what my general expectation is. And if I'm not clear on that, I could ask my company officer or my chief or whoever, like, hey, just clarifying what I'm doing. Right. It's huge. And I think like, especially having cards like that, those little mental reminders, those things that kind of jar your memory, especially in the volunteer setting where, that person in that seat may be different. 3 calls, it could be 3 different people. That's even more important to have like, hey, I've been on the rig and, I've been busy with my family, we've been in a town, whatever the case may be. And I come back and I'm running the calls first time in a month. Oh, what am I supposed to do on this? Oh, I got it right here in front of me. Right. Yep. And people will, throw rocks at that, and say, oh, you should know that stuff. But man, like I have no problem with memory aids, man. Like little things like just to jar my mind on the way to the call. Because when we hit the parking brake, we step off the rig, the expectation is we act. And that's not the time to go back and try to go, okay, what do I do again? That's not the time to I had an officer one time.
Right.
We'll figure it out. We'll figure it out when we get there. Well, shouldn't we kind of have that idea? Yeah, I'm not a big fan of that. Figure it out when you get there. That's to me like that. If that's the case, then you might as well give your gear to the cop that's pulled up in front of the house, right? Because he's going to do the same thing.
Right.
But Bill, it's been fun, man. It's obviously enjoy talking to you here. Man, just I love talking differences in just operations, man, and hearing kind of picking your brain a little bit on water supply and some of your tactical stuff that you guys are running into, because I think at the end of the day, that's how we get better. We share experiences, information, and I think the beauty of like podcasting is it allows us to talk to people from all over the world and get different, viewpoints and really for a lot of guys that can't afford maybe to go to FDIC or a place like that, to kind of get outside their four walls metaphorically and challenge their mindset a little bit. And what I've found in doing, this job and being able to have the opportunities to teach and podcast and do this stuff over the last few years is you realize while there are some definite differences in operations and things like that across the country, we do share a lot of similarities, right? No matter where you go, the same job has to be done. The variables that change are staffing, response times, equipment, resources, things like that. Those tend to be the biggest things that vary from place to place. But the job itself is the job, right? Fire burns the same in Fayetteville as it does in Oshkosh. Technical rescue calls. I mean, someone trapped in a silo in Wisconsin is going to be, similar problem that you're going to run into with your technical rescue team there. Going to a high-speed accident, there's certain things that carry across the board. And that's the beauty of this is like, you realize like there are a lot of similarities. And so how do we get better? Right. And we're in different states, different parts of the country. But we're finding, a lot of shared things that we deal with. And that's the whole point of this is if you guys listen to the show, take some things away from the show, write some notes down, maybe spur some things in your mind to go back and train on in your organization or to talk about with your members, how that you can be better. And that's the whole point is like, not saying that any of us have all the answers, because I don't think if anybody tells you they got all the answers, they got it all figured out, you probably should run the other direction.
Yeah.
Yeah, they're full of it. So hopefully, man, I had a good time.
I did too.
This is the kind of stuff that I think that makes us all better is sitting down and having these conversations. Like I said, the show is very informal. We don't really, like I said before we started, you didn't have a script, you didn't have an outline. We kind of just sitting at the table talking, man. So I've enjoyed it, but that brings us to the last part of the show here. We do the rapid fire questions. Haven't primed you at all, so this is all spontaneous.
I don't know what we got going here.
He's gonna get it here. He's gonna get rapid fire, 6 questions. Again, 60 seconds, give or take, per answer. And this is raw Bill Adkins right here, man. Like you're getting off the cuff responses. Are you ready?
I'm ready.
All right. I'm gonna throw you a softball here. This is a slow pitch, the first one. Okay. All right. What do you think is the best job on the Fireground?
On the Fireground, the nozzle one. I love, I'm assistant chief here. I don't get to fight fire as much as I used to, but last week we had a fire and we were short staffed. And when I showed up, the nozzle was on the ground charged. And I was so excited when I got the mask up, get that nozzle and went inside, and went to work. Loved it.
That's a great day.
Yeah, it was a great day. I came back and told the wife how excited I was. She's like, "Well, you had a good day, didn't you?" I'm like, "Hell yeah, I did."
Yeah, that's what's up, man. Hey, a man after my own heart. I'm just glad you didn't say something about like truck work, cutting holes in the roofs or something like that. So,
not me.
All right, here we go. Question number 2. What is your favorite water supply drill?
jet siphoning and moving water from one tank to another.
Okay.
Yeah, just getting and establishing that draft. You can practice all you want, but get those different scenarios to where I got to get water this way, or this way.
Yeah. Yeah. I dig it, man. Question number 3. What is one book, podcast, whatever, that you would recommend that every firefighter that's trying to kind of be a better firefighter should read? What is one piece of literature that you would recommend that everybody get their hands on, from the new guy to the senior guy? If you had to say, hey, this is the one thing you should read, even if you're not a reader, or listen to if you're not a podcast guy, that you would recommend to them to make themselves better?
On the fire side, it would be, and you feel I'm being because it's Goldfeder. Billy Goldfeder's passed it on. I like to learn from people's what happened. It's a book of stories of what happened on Fireground. So I like to learn from people's mistakes and also know what worked for them on certain runs, so that I can fix so I don't have that same problem.
Yeah.
And a non-fire related book would be It's Your Ship, taking pride in everything that you do.
Yeah, it's a great book.
Yeah,
it really is. I finished that a couple months ago, and highly recommend. Yeah, definitely not a fire book, but man, just the concepts, the ownership part of it, and kind of figuring out, man, what a great story. So yeah, definitely.
Sure is.
All right. So question number, this is 4, right? Yeah. Question number 4. What's the biggest issue you feel is facing the rural fire service in 2024?
The lack of training and participation. Even when I understand people's times is short, but if you're wanting to do the job and be a part of the job and get the T-shirt, as we say, you need to know your job too, because when people call 911, they expect results, not just somebody to show up.
Sure.
A lot of the fire service right now as a whole has a lot of seat fillers, and I'm sure you deal with that too. And I wish more of those people would take pride and learn the job.
Yeah. Yeah. No, great answer. I think that transcends not just the rural fire service. I mean, the fire service in general. Yeah.
Because in a rural setting, we're not much different than even all the way up to urban. It's still, I'm a huge believer in it's the same job. It's just some people, they don't get enough time to learn as much as the urban and suburban areas do.
Sure. Yeah. I think, you hit the nail on the head there. I mean, at the end of the day, like, especially in the, the rural setting where maybe the volume is not there, it's even more important to train, even more important to dig in and kind of close that gap that maybe, experience wise, you're not able to do just due to call load, whatever the case may be, availability. So how do you close that gap, right? How do you bridge the gap, where maybe, you're not in inner city Detroit going to fires every day. Well, how do you close that gap? Well, training and education, right? Get into there, you dig in, and you get out in the drill ground, and you start learning as much as you can to hopefully make yourself a better operator, right? So that should be the goal. All right, question number 5. So this is a tough one, because I feel like I don't want to put you on the spot here, but who is one person who's had the biggest impact on your fire service career?
So it would probably be a past chief from here, Eric Wolfer.
Okay.
He is the one that challenged me to look up. So we used to do a lot of freelancing, like I mentioned earlier in the podcast. He was the one that challenged me to find a system that works for us based on our resources to basically hone in those scene assignments, the nurse tanker operation. He was the one that challenged me to go do that. And not only that, he's a farmer here in the area, and he is one hell of a firefighter. Whenever he shows up, and he don't do this for a living, he's a volunteer. And when he shows up, that the problem's going to get fixed. Yeah. He will find a way.
That's a hard question too, because it's there's so many people that impact us, but you know, I think each of us, you know, I can think of a couple, 2 or 3 guys that have had a major impact in my career, but one in particular, you know, is my first captain. I feel like, you know, he's the one that kind of gave me my true love for the fire service, because he loved his men. He was a problem solver. He was a hard worker. And so I think, like, for me, like, you know, was he perfect? No, but man, like, he kind of set the tone. And I guess I say that, you know, like, people that are on this job, don't forget that new members coming in, man, like, you know, whether they're new to the fire service or new as an officer or whatever the case may be, the opportunity is there to pass down that information, to share that passion, to get people, to kind of give them that spark, right? Mm-hmm. And that's what it's all about. And so, like I said, I mean, you know, it's I love that, you know, you knew exactly where you're going. It's a hard question for some people, because
I have a ton of mentors I would love to mention, you know, but you asked for one, and that's the one that, you know, he showed me a lot of things. And like I say, he's the one that when he shows up, we know we're good.
Yeah. Well, and it sounds like in a lot of ways had a big influence on your trajectory of, you know, digging in on training and learning and being more methodical with your operation. So, I mean, like, that's, you know, nobody's self-made in this business, right? Nobody. Right. And that's in life in general. The truth is, this is a team sport, you know, and we have to be able to rely on other people to learn and grow and be teachable. Right. And those are huge things. And those people that I think kind of help kind of direct us in the right path, man, that get us down that road. You look back at those people, like, man, you don't realize sometimes how big of an impact they had until you're 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 years down the road or more. Sometimes, I mean, it's, you know, you get to the end of your career and you realize, well, wow, like, this guy, I didn't realize it at the time, but they absolutely changed my career, changed my outlook on this job altogether. And so that's huge, man. So question number 6 is a personal question, and that is, you know, what's the one thing that you're most looking forward to in the coming year, as far as the profession goes, as far as the job goes? What is one thing that you're looking forward to in 2025 or the end of 2024 here, the most? Where are you setting your sights on as you move forward here in year 31 in the fire service?
Yeah, that's a tough question there. So mine is, what can I learn new? You know, what class is out there? I want to know what I don't know. And like we mentioned before, no one has all the answers. I want to, you know, over this next year, I want to know what I don't know. And I want to go to classes that is going to show me some things that I can expand upon. Yeah.
No, I like that, man. Always learning. And that's, man, what a testament. 30 years on and you're still trying to learn. There's a lot of guys that say, oh, you know, you've seen enough, you've done enough, like, why are you taking classes? But as long as you're doing this, I mean, why not grow? Why not be better, right? That's, to me, like, the day you stop learning is the day you should probably hang it up.
You should. I agree. 100%.
You know, and I know that's cliche and people say that all the time, but damn, that's the truth. Like, that's the truth. Like, you got, if you stop learning this job, you're become a liability.
Yep.
You know, and I mean, the job is, I feel like, changing so much. There's so many things that I mean, from EV fires and all this lithium ion stuff to, I mean, you name it. We wear so many hats in the fire service now. It's not just putting water on the red stuff anymore. There's truly, when you look at the profession, man, like, you go to FEIC, there are so many awesome classes on so many varied topics that, I mean, it's hard to pick. It's hard to pick because it's like, you know, I feel like I need to learn a lot on a lot of things. And it's like, you know, so finding those classes that challenge you to get outside your comfort zone, right? And kind of push you to grow mentally, physically, whatever the case may be, your relationships with your family, your fire service family. Man, that's so many things out there from the mental health stuff. I mean, that I think that it's sometimes it's overwhelming when you really look at how much there really is out there now, especially with, like, technology has allowed us to share information at a pace that is unprecedented, right? You can't pick up your phone without some little blurb from a training group, an instructor, a video on YouTube, Instagram. I mean, there's a million things out there to go comb through, and it's just trying to find those things that really enhance your operation, right? I mean, and find things that pertain to your situation. That is the trick, is kind of balancing it all out, right? And so I love that answer, man. Like, that to me is that's real talk, right? Is like, hey, it's not any one thing. It's just I'm trying to find the next thing that I can do to be better, right? What's the next thing? So let me ask you this. You got 30 years on. You still love doing the job. Obviously, you're still loving the job. Dan, do you feel like you're still as excited today as you were 30 years ago?
I really am. I love this job. That's the best job in the world, in my opinion. I love it. Like I say, just last weekend, it was Saturday. I was so when I saw that nozzle sitting there, and I didn't have to be command, because now I run command a lot of times, whether it be at work or even here.
Yep.
When I saw that nozzle and I knew there was already someone in command, it was just my if you could see the smile on my face, it was ear to ear.
Yeah, man, that's awesome. I love to see guys that are, still passionate about the job, man. They don't let the BS, beat them down, and just, I think, like, that's in the simplest form, we're all firemen, right? At the end of the day, like, all the politics aside, career volunteer, budgets, all this nonsense, the drama in the firehouse, I mean, all that stuff. When that tone goes off, and you get a chance to actually do what we all signed up to do, that's the greatest feeling in the world.
Oh yeah.
When you know that you made a difference, when you know that you're doing what you signed up to do, that's the stuff that, in my opinion, that's what keeps you going, right? That's what keeps you moving forward, is like, all right, all that other stuff is just peripheral, right? This is the job.
Yep.
And that's the beauty of it. So, man, that's all I got for you. We look at this. We came in under 2 hours. I know we said 90 minutes, but we did under 2. So I feel like I didn't ramble too much. I didn't go chasing too many rabbit trails. So I'm prone to do that. I know Duffy tells me all the time. He's like, dude, I like to talk. What can I say? That's why I like the podcast.
Nothing wrong with that.
Oh man, Bill, it's been fun. Thanks for coming on the show today. Thank you for sharing some of your experiences and some of the things that you've kind of seen over the years, and hopefully folks got a lot out of it. I think people will. It's one of those things where we try to keep the show very balanced, in the sense of we don't just talk about guys from cities or whatever. We talk about all sorts of stuff. We want a very holistic view of the fire service, and I think sometimes people forget that most of us are not working in places that have unlimited manpower, that are working in a beautiful, perfect urban system where we can throw 50 guys in a fire. That's just not real life, and
not real.
So I enjoy the conversation, because I feel like you kind of have perspective on both sides of the career and the volunteer side. And you've kind of seen some things that obviously you have to adjust for in those settings, and that's what we try as much as possible to make the show kind of set back to that. Like, with limited staffing, how do you make things work? And that's the beauty of this conversation, man. Is like I said, we're in different states and different places, different time zones, and we're sitting here, we're just having a kitchen table style conversation, learning, sharing experiences, ideas, thoughts. And hopefully people will take that back and go back to your department. Anybody listening to the show, go back to your department, ask questions, learn, grow, figure out how to make your system better. And that being said, man, if people want to get a hold of you, what's the best way to get a hold of you if they got questions or have some training stuff they want to run by you? Email, phone number, whatever you want to throw out there, man.
Email is probably the best, and that's it's B Adkins at lsfd.org. So B Adkins at lsfd. That's BADKINS. A lot of people say I sent you an email, but they spelled AT. That's a more common spell, but it's ADKINS.
Perfect. So there you have it. If you got questions for Bill, shoot him an email. I'd be more than happy to answer your questions, I'm sure. That being said, episode 51 is in the books. It's been a blast, brother. Hope you have a great afternoon.
Been a blast. Thank you.
See you, man.
Okay. See you.